was December of 2011. I was living in Chicago, had been there a few months, and my phone rings. Mom, she says, just wanted to let you know, Tony's going in for some tests. Don't really know what's going on yet, but wanted to be sure you were aware. I said, okay. A couple weeks later, she calls and says, your brother has lymphoma. We don't know what kind yet. They're going to type it out. We'll see. I said, okay. 1 week later, she calls again. She says it's called primary effusion lymphoma. It's bad. I said, I'm coming home. So I packed some clothes, talked to my boss, threw my computer and my dog in the car, and I drove back to Arizona, where I spent the next 6 weeks or so being with family. My sister flew in, and the three of us were able to be a sibling unit for the first time in years. We just enjoyed each other. We found that the prognosis was unforgiving. It's basically a worst case scenario. 2 to 3 months without treatment, 4 to 6 months with treatment, and no one had ever survived longer than a year. But we fight. It's what we do. So my brother started treatment. And his treatment had a particular schedule, or a particular pattern. Day 1, chemo day, was terrible, as you might imagine. Then, because they pump you full of steroids, he had a couple of days of feeling okay. And then the next week, he bottomed out. No white blood cells. That means he goes into neutropenic shock. So he's got fever and his body hurts and he can't fight any infection. So the first time we go to the hospital, I'm in the emergency room with my brother. He's hurting. And I'm searching for God. What is this? Where are you? What's happening? Wasn't this the point? Isn't this why you were on the cross in the first place? And yet we're here. So I'm working on my computer, and I see my brother. They've given him some morphine, right? He didn't want it at first, but they managed to convince him. So it's the good stuff. So my brother's like, he's under the covers, and I see him kind of moving a little, and I think, what's he doing? I hear him kind of muttering, and I lean in close, and I hear him saying, push it real good. A little salt and pepper, I don't know. That's apparently morphine is really actually the good stuff. So he starts confessing kind of some things from childhood, like that he never actually teleported to my Aunt Rita's house. He used to go into the closet and pretend that he had gone to Atlanta. And to this day, I have no idea where he was because we would open the closet, my sister and I, and we would search for him. This is not even a walk-in closet, and we never could find him. I have no idea what he did. But he made me promise to tell my sister that he was sorry he never took her with him. So we get through, and we're in his cycle. Every 3 weeks, he's in the hospital. I go back to Chicago, living my life, trying to be normal. Late April, I come back to Arizona. My mom has to go out of town, and so we need someone to help take care of my brother. It happens to be shock week, and he says, I don't want to go to the hospital. I said, okay, I will do what I can do. So I set my alarm for every 3 hours, gave him a full dose of Tylenol just to keep his fever moderate. I missed it by half an hour one time because it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and his fever skyrocketed, and I was terrified. But we made it. We did it. We managed to keep him out of the hospital that week. And that Friday, I looked at him as he laid on the couch. He was vacant. He was done. He was done fighting. So the next day, Mom took me to the airport, and I said, Mom, it's over. He's finished. She said, I know. And we cried through lunch. And I went back to Chicago. About 10 days later, my phone rings. I'm on a mental health tape just trying to get my shit together, right? My phone rings. It's Mom. She says, we're taking Tony to the hospital. I don't know, something. He's something. Call your sister. I said, okay. So I called my sister. She got on the next plane back to Arizona, and I jumped in my car a few hours later. I arrived on Wednesday morning, and I called to tell my mom I was in town. I'm going to run home, take a shower, expecting that he's in neutropenic shock. He needs to be clean, and road dirt is not clean, right? So she says, don't. Just drop the dog off and come here. You need to be here. This does not bode well. So I show up. My mom and sister meet me outside with a cup of coffee, and they give me the rundown. I don't know really what they said, but I heard them saying stroke, he's unresponsive, DNR, hospice. He never wanted to be here. I got the gist. A couple hours later, we were in hospice care. And 6 hours later, surrounded by our family, I held my brother's hand as he took his last breath in this world. May 2nd, 2012, my world went dark. My big brother was no longer here. This was a new world. This was a world with no color, with no shiny. Right, it was dull. I couldn't breathe. I had no oxygen. But we do. We carry on. This is life. And I'm mad. We handled my brother's death the way that we handle everything. We came together as a family. We wrote jokes into his obituary. Only the jokes that we would get. No one else got them. So when his obituary was read at his funeral and we were shaking with laughter, I'm certain that everyone thought we were sobbing. We were laughing. It's a coping mechanism. I name-called him during my eulogy because he's my brother, after all. I'm not going to not tell the world he was a jerk, because he was. I'll say that now, too. And again later, I'm sure. I stayed here in Arizona for a little while, and then I went up to Montana to visit my best friend who was running a rehab center for adult women. And I fell in love with Montana. The funny thing was, despite the fact that my world had no color, no oxygen, I could breathe in Montana. There was color in Montana. There was life there. So I did the thing that you're not ever supposed to do, right? There are 2 times you don't make major life decisions: when you're medicated and when you're in grief, right? But this was my shot. I had just watched my brother die 3 weeks shy of his 38th birthday. I understood suddenly that life is short. So I figured, worst case scenario, I come back to Arizona where my mom is, right? Tail tucked between my legs, because it didn't work. But it worked. It was wonderful. I grew there and I grieved there, and I had all this extra love now that my brother wasn't using. And so I dumped it on the women at the center. I found that I knew, this is not conjecture, I knew that my brother left this world not knowing what he meant to me, not understanding what he meant in my life. And so I made a promise that no one would leave my life not understanding what they meant, not understanding the way I loved them. So I did that at the center. I poured that love into the girls at the center. And one day, I sat across from one of the women who was going to leave early. She wasn't ready to be clean. And I said to her, don't be stupid. Start small. Don't go back to where you were. Start small. People die this way. And then I said, it's okay. You're okay. I love you, and God loves you. God doesn't love you less when you have a needle in your arm. He is with you all the more. We'll be here when you're ready. Just call. We love you no matter what. And I understood in that moment that there's a fundamental difference between love and forgiveness. We're all looking for forgiveness, but forgiveness implies a judgment of wrong, and love requires no such judgment. It simply allows and accepts. And in that moment, I understood my dad, the source of about 95% of my issues. My dad was an absent alcoholic, neglectful. He was not a bad man, he was a good man, but he was a terrible father. But I understood in the moment that he did the best he could. We all do the best we can. And I was able to sort of let go of some of my anger and my frustration that he hadn't been what I wanted him to be. I hadn't let go of my anger at God for not healing my brother, but that would come. I moved back to Arizona after a few years in Montana to be with my family again. 2015. Later that year in December, my stepmom calls. She says, "Your dad's had a stroke. I don't know, this time feels different." She says that because my dad was in and out of the hospital. Alcohol poisoning, heart attacks, COPD, just everything. We just kind of assumed he was some kind of a cockroach because it never ended. He was always out, right? You thought he's right on the edge of death where the nurses are like, "We've literally never seen this before." And then boom, he's fine. His liver's actually great. How? We don't know. So we assumed cockroach or some kind of weird nuclear mechanism. But this time she says, it feels different. He goes into hospice care in the middle of January, early January, and my sister and I fly to Tennessee to be with him. We see him for a few minutes the night we arrive, and then the next day, my sister spent the day with him. I told my stepmom, "I'll take the night shift. You take the night off." She'd been there every night, overnight, for 6 weeks. I said, "I'll do it. I'll text you, I promise, if anything happens." Nothing happened. It was uneventful. His breathing never changed. He's been in hospice. He hasn't opened his eyes in a week, hasn't spoken, and more than that, did nothing. Honestly, the moment I hit send, he moves and he moans. So I went to the nurse who was right outside and I said, "Can you get his meds?" She said, "Okay." And I took my dad's hand for the first time in more than 15 years. And I spoke to him and I said, "It's okay, Dad. Relax. She's coming." And he opened his eyes and he locked onto mine, the first contact again in 15 years. And I heard myself speak, "Hi, Daddy. I love you." And he turned his head and he breathed out for the last time. And for the second time in 4 years, I heard a nurse say, "I'm so sorry." And I didn't understand. What is happening? What is this? But something had changed. So we handled my dad's affairs. We reconnected with family we'd been missing. I got back on the plane to come to Arizona, and for the very first time, I felt like I was going home. I had peace. I understood myself in a new way. I get back home. I get to work, and I find a message from a friend at work, and he says, "How are you holding up?" I said, "Well, that is a long story." He said, "Well, why don't we go to lunch sometime?" I said, "What about if we go get beer? Because it's really a long story." And he said, "Okay." So we did. I told him everything. I told him what I understood on the airplane home was that my wounds had not been healed in the room with my dad. They had been erased. I do not have scar tissue where those wounds had been. It is as though they never were. I don't understand it. I cannot explain it, but I know that the moment I uttered the words to my dad, "I love you," my world changed. the lights came back on. So a few months later, Mike and I were house hunting. And a few months after that, we were married. And I can tell you that I know love now. I know love because these two men I loved and lost. I know love because this man I have in my life. I know love now. I can keep my promise now. I put it on my arm. Per l'amore io vivo. For the love I live. That which had sought to darken my life, to turn my lights out, is now lighting the fuel, the fire that fuels me. It is my energy for the love I live.